Hello and welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
All right, guys, welcome to another Note to File podcast, and specifically another Sticky Notes edition, where we cover current events, anything topical, fun stuff, kind of in the field. I'm Brad, the kid Hightower.
Because you're so young and youthful.
I'm very hip and very young.
And I'm Denali, and I am not a child.
Oh, okay. That seems like a little bit of a shot. Or maybe that you just couldn't come up with your own nickname.
Maybe column A, column B.
If you could be if you were a sound effect, what would you be?
A sound effect?
I think you would be like, wah, wah, wah.
Okay, so this probably isn't a great self-reflection, but that's exactly what I thought of. I was like the womp womp womp.
No. You gotta be something cool.
No. I was actually playing with these the other day. There's some wild ones. I don't know. I mean, I kind of like the top hat, like, because I feel like I'm hilarious.
Okay.
I mean, I find myself hilarious. I don't know if anyone else does, but so that.
That's
what about you?
good.
What's
I'll
yours? You have to have an answer now.
I don't know. I really haven't thought about it. I usually have something in mind. I think mine would be like, yeah. That's it.
Oh, okay. That one. Okay.
Well, I mean,
we should find these,
right?
and use them in the coming episodes. Just have like a sound effects button.
It's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea. All right, guys. If you're out there in the audience, let's hear some feedback. Let's hear what you guys think. These sticky notes are meant to be. We kind of pull them together at the last minute, just based off of like what we've seen over the last week or two, or day, or hour. In the clinical research field. Yeah, well, we figure them out. So it's just stuff we find interesting. If you guys see stuff you want to see covered, please let us know. And I'm gonna go ahead and let's get us going, man.
Where do you want to start?
Start it?
Yeah.
No, that's not where I want to start.
One? No.
Actually.
It's a preview. The sneak preview. For people who can speed read. That's never a skill I picked up. I mean, granted, I learned to read in like the 3rd grade, so speed reading was like miles away.
So for some reason, it seems to be broken. Oh, okay. I have it set a little bit differently. What did that do? That switch it?
Yep, you got it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Well, so this one I found interesting, and probably more so showing my lack of knowledge and like what goes into becoming a doctor, because spoiler alert, I'm not a doctor.
Really?
But I know it's news I'll have to break. But it's talking about what resident physicians should learn about clinical trials, and basically it's the AMA coming out and saying they have courses that they're putting out for residents to learn more about clinical trials, which, I mean, awesome, great. I think this is phenomenal research, but it goes into sort of saying that it's they can do this in their free time. They can self-select to do these courses, which is, I don't know. I mean, I've never been a resident, but I've certainly had friends who've gone through that, and my recollection is that's not a time where you have a ton of just free time sitting around. So we're saying, great, residents, use your free time to do these courses. But the thing that I was thinking about as I was reading this, where it talks about like how not all residents are going to be exposed to clinical trials or going to be involved in clinical research at all. And I think, again, probably a little bit more me being naive, right? Like I'm in Madison, we have a large academic institutions here where I sort of assume that like anyone who goes through residency has exposure to clinical trials. I don't know if that's similar at OU.
I mean, it seemed like a mixed bag. So when I started there, they had the residents doing, I mean, it's almost not for the benefit of the resident, but a lot of times the residents would be doing like physical exams on trials.
Got it.
And now they weren't really getting, an education in terms of, what you see the AMA offering in terms of, content about safety and dosage ranges, effectiveness, and adverse events. A lot of times it was literally just like, we need someone to do a physical exam. I think they would give them like $50. So they would line up, to be available.
So you're supplementing income, but not teaching them anything about what they're doing.
Yeah, not really. And they tended to they changed throughout the years. Eventually they stopped letting residents do that because residents would basically like bail on whatever they were supposed to be doing so they could come over and make a little bit of extra money.
Got it.
Yeah, so I think it probably depends. And then we did help residents work on their research projects, but they were often more like retrospective data type things,
Hmm.
like working on a actual
Wow.
clinical trial or more traditional clinical trial.
Well, and so I guess that begged like the question for me, or got me thinking, like, if we have a whole generations of residents and physicians and MDs in training coming through their education program and they're not being exposed to clinical trials, what does that mean then when they become practitioners in the field? And what is their awareness, or if they're not doing trials in residency, are they going to be doing trials later on? And then what is the even awareness and of running trials, or how do they incorporate that into their treatment of patients? And so, like, what is the impact of excluding clinical trials from residents training programs on how clinical trials are incorporated into practice down the road?
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a good question. I know I've seen at least a couple of like movements to help, train doctors early to get involved in clinical trials. Because frankly, I mean, I worry because clinical trials are not getting easier
right.
or better, So I feel like a lot of the reason that some of the doctors do it now is just because like they've been doing it. They've sort of been through enough. But like if you're coming in fresh as like a young, newly out of school physician, you're probably like, nah, I don't want to do
Well,
that.
I mean, and then there's the whole, like, I don't know, bias against research naive PIs.
Oh
And
wow, that's a
so,
yeah,
right,
that's its own thing altogether.
right. And so, like, we're adding to this problem by not incorporating some of this into, the standard education. I mean, I will fully acknowledge that there's a lot of shit to learn. So it's not like it's like you're, looking for things to fill the time and like fill gaps, but it seems like a problem that's going to perpetuate itself as far as access to clinical trials. If you have community physicians who aren't aware of research, never were engaged with research, they're probably not going to consider research as an option for any
Yeah.
of their patients. And so you're missing out on massive portions of the population of patients who aren't going to be exposed to trials because their doctors is just not part of their world.
Yeah, and it's already big. I mean, it's already a big problem. You already see what do they say? 3% of physicians participate in clinical trials. I'm sure Paul Libson, if you're listening, tell me why that's wrong for some reason. But that's at least the sort of accepted statistic we see. So yeah, it makes me. I mean, look, this is good, right? That they're
Right.
giving residents something as a resource, but I don't know. I wonder if it's enough.
Again, all in all, yeah, positive what they're doing here. But again, in all of my free time as a resident, I'm going to jump in and do this. It seems wishful thinking.
Fair, yeah. I'd be curious to hear if anybody out there knows, like, if the residents. I know there's some people listening who are in academic institutions. If like how involved your residents are in clinical research, and this seems like it's very fairly overview. I mean, Belmont Report, Declaration of Helsinki, Nuremberg Code. Yes, that's stuff you learn, but it doesn't really tell you how to do stuff. It's guiding principles,
Yeah.
but lacks a lot of like, but you got to know how to log into 7 systems and
Well, if you're a
when
PI,
to,
you don't.
when to wow that if you're a PI you do. If you're not a PI you don't. PI still got to log into these systems and sign
Yeah, to
off
sign
and
off.
and
Yeah.
that stuff, which is somehow even worse when you have to do it once every 6 months.
Yeah, I could see that.
Anyways, nonetheless, good, and I think hopefully we see more education like earlier in medical training.
Yeah, we'll see.
I love it. You found this, and I thought it was interesting
Yeah.
about private equity firms investing in the clinical trial management systems, which
You
is
need to
kind
share
of
your screen.
sorry, I gotta switch tabs.
Mhm.
There we go. I'll figure this out one of these days. See it now.
Yes.
Beautiful. It was a little surprising to me. I mean, this article is specifically about site-facing CTMS. It talks a little bit about Riverside acquiring a controlling stake in Creo, which I don't think I knew, but it's interesting nonetheless. I think people probably have a pretty good idea of how I feel about PE. What's your
Well,
feeling here?
So here's my thing here, and I think, like, and again, to be preface this article is from what looks like PE World, or it's
Yeah.
directed towards PE folks, right? So that's like the lens in which it's written, which is, obviously going to change a little bit of what they talk about. But I think it's interesting here because it talks about like how there's major challenges in the industry, which like interoperability and automation. And it's, I mean, yes, I think you can't, there's absolutely room for improvement in the CTMS world today. Like, I think no one would say that there's a perfect solution out there that does it all. And there's certainly lots of things that need to be done to improve it, especially from the site side. But what what I'm not clear about is, besides throwing money at it, what these PE firms are doing. And I mean, I throw money at my parents, my child's PTA, that I don't have to get involved. But like, this seems like it's a different scenario than that, and I'm just not clear as to how throwing money at it's gonna solve that problem. And the other piece here that I also kind of have been thinking about is, if you're throwing money at it, the goal here ultimately, and like I think there's a, I don't know, section in here which talks about returns and exits, right? Like that's the goal. The goal from a PE perspective is to go in, to exit, to make an increase, right? To make a profit. Um, and I think it's pretty widely acknowledged across the spectrum that sites are not bags of money. Like, they don't have bags of money sitting under their desk, unless I missed that when I saw your clinic. Like, I don't think that's really what sites have
We
going on.
bury our money in the
You
ground.
bury it in holes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Smart.
So what I'm not clear about here is that, yes, there's a recognized problem. Yes, we're going to throw money at to fix it. What exactly is being done besides throwing money at to fix it, I'm unclear on. And then, where is the actual ROI, in the sense of, we're going to make hockey stick margins, we're going to make an X factor exit, when sites just don't have a ceiling, right? Like, you can only charge so much. I'm not clear as to exactly how the PE model fits in this standardly, and I would love to hear someone explain it to me, or have a conversation about it, honestly, because I don't understand how this is going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think everybody sort of knows by now that the site space is not necessarily, yeah, it's not your moneymaker.
Right, and I think that's
And
pretty
then
well acknowledged in the industry. I mean, anyone who says otherwise is probably not being honest with you or themselves.
you would think, but I mean, I think, and for me as a site, you start to wonder what impact could this possibly have on sites if now, like, I felt like for a while there, sort of like one of the last untouched places where like some of the site facing technology, like, you see that some of these CTMSs are being built at the site level, which
Hmm.
makes me feel good. It makes me like it's likely a solution that is at least close to working because it came from a site. Now you're gonna have private equity involvement. How much are they going to change it? Because look, I'm sure they all want to help sites. That's their main goal, is to help sites get better.
That's their
But
number one charter point. Yeah.
definitely not to just turn a profit by any which way that means. So are we going to be looking at, higher costs? Are we looking at features that maybe favor sponsors instead of sites?
Mm.
Because I mean, there's a connection there, and there's a lot of data in these CTMS systems too. So you start to wonder, like, is there money in the data, and who owns that data? And then you got to be a little more on your toes again, as a site.
Yeah, and I think those are all good questions. And again, I think that's why I just have a lot of questions, because again, reading articles like this, it's really vague. It's like, what are we going to do? We're going to fix these problems, but there's no how. It's like, again, we throw money at it, and like that. Like I said, it can solve the bake sale problem. Like, take my money, buy cookies at the grocery store. I don't have to bake cookies. Awesome. But like, I feel like it's a little bit more complex than that to fix some of these problems, and it requires true investment, not just in dollars, but in time and energy and effort and resources. And again, all of that to be said, is the goal then to make a really good solution that works better, or is it to make an exit at a certain multiple?
Yeah, and I was trying to find the quote in here that I thought was kind of telling. That was about exiting, essentially.
Is it
Of
at the
course,
end? I think it might be at
I
the end.
thought it was, but I didn't see it down there. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but um, yeah, I guess we'll see. I mean, have we seen any, like, historically, any like big CTMS moves that have made, like, actually resulted in anything of value? I mean, I know some have been bought, some have been killed, some have been
I mean, I think you do
rolled
see
up.
that, right? Like you see a lot of, I mean, there's been a ton of VC and PE investment, I would say, in site tech space in the past several years, and also a lot of M&A, where you're getting folks being bought up by larger organizations. I mean, to date, I don't think I've necessarily seen that be like a rocket ship, propulsion to success for or differentiator or change in those systems to the scale of which they're, and again, they're talking about huge, large scale change. We're going to do all of this. We're going to do these great things. I think a lot of companies have invested on that rhetoric. I've not yet seen it come to fruition.
Yeah, it's true. And I did at least find the quote that, there's a good exit environment in the clinical trial technology space with lots of end-to-market PE firms looking for a platform, as well as global PE investors that own much larger companies and public companies there. Which again, just makes it seem like hey, this looks like people want to buy shit in this space, so let's do stuff.
It looks good on paper.
Yeah.
The Excel, the financial model really made it say it would pay off. Looks like we got a comment here from Stephanie. Hi, PE in the case of Creo, very much supporting our mission of designing more solutions built for sites. Leadership's choice of PE was based on aligning with that mission. Definitely don't know much about PE, but happy to share what I do know from my years at Creo, which again, I think that's great. And I think, I talked about this with someone a couple days ago where like in theory, these models actually make a ton of sense. You have someone who is investing and they want to do good and they want to make an improvement. Ultimately, hopefully the goal is a successful exit with an X multiple. And I think fundamentally the concept is strong. It makes sense. Same with consulting, right? You have to bring in someone who's an expert and they're going to provide value. I think the issue being is that this happens at scale and you get more and more removed from people who actually are looking to align missions and more just looking at those financial models in their office. They've never been an operator. They've never been involved in the industry, but they see to that quote, Brad, that you mentioned, they see that this is something that could be interesting. So we're going to jump in without really knowing the space. So I think fundamentally, not saying it's at all a poor concept in theory, but I think the challenges I see potentially in these models are when people don't understand the space, their true interest isn't in the space, and they're looking at it just from a dollars and cents perspective, which then I think ultimately misaligns incentives.
And yeah, I have very limited interaction with PE, but it definitely does seem like there's a spectrum too, right? There are some that legitimately are trying to cash out. There's some that are legitimately trying to build and partner. Mm-hmm. And that probably is a very case by case basis. I just know, again, my experience, and maybe it's just what I've seen, like I tend to see a lot more bad stories than good stories when it comes to PE involvement, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I guess Creo was even previously owned by PE before this, so nothing new.
Well, and I think I don't know. The biggest thing, and again, maybe this is all doom and gloom, glass half empty type of shit, but like when you think about this story playing out in other sectors, I think rural health is the big one where you can look at this and be like, oh, this absolutely fucked rural health. Right? You get hospitals closing, you get patient care suffering because patient care is no longer the focus. It's the dollars. And again, ideally, you do this right, you do both, right? Like I'm not saying one is bad. I'm not saying making money is bad. I think there's room for both. But I think you get people who are very short-sighted and they want the one marshmallow now, not the 5 marshmallows that you get after you wait for 3 minutes. So I think, maybe I'm just more gun shy because I've seen some of those stories, so I get a little anxious about it. But I think, again, I would like to also to see more concrete plans than just throwing money at it too. I think that's the other component. Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily see in this article either.
Justin brings up Clinical Conductor bought by Advara, which is owned by Riverside. So Riverside's mentioned a lot in this article. So there seems to be a lot of movement. So either they're real smart or real not, I guess, depending on how it all turns out for them. Also, shout out Helen R. You want to teach residents how to do clinical trials? All right, get this lady in your medical school. Get her teaching. Cool. All right, I got to switch tabs because I'm not good at internet.
I thought you were the kid. Aren't kids supposed to be good with the onlines these days?
Yeah. Well, did I do it?
Good job.
See, I did it because
you're a kid.
Because I'm the kid. No, I'm not a kid. The kid. There's a very big difference.
The child? No, it's the kid.
No,
Okay.
come on. Don't just wait. You just wait till I find a nickname for you.
Oh.
Wah, wah, wah.
Fuck.
I thought this was an interesting. Actually, you found this one too. Actually, you found all of these, so great
I
job.
did.
I claim no.
I got my shit together this
I
week.
claim no. I just like to figure it out at the last minute, but
Mhm.
it's good. But it's interesting because it's someone from in a an oncology biotech, basically recognizing that they're a difficult sponsor, and beyond that, you know, they're also recognizing that it's damaging their reputation with sites. No one wants to do their phase 3 trial because they're difficult to work with, and that they, even though they seemingly have a great drug, it's sort of asking, what are the telltale signs of a difficult sponsor, and how you can kind of address that from within when it seems like no one's listening. And I'm guessing this is probably a bigger problem than most people are willing to admit, if I had to guess. Um, and then, I love Reddit just because it's a double edged sword, but at least you tend to get a lot of fairly transparent answers because it's, anonymous or anonymous enough that people feel comfortable doing that. And it's interesting. I think if you're a sponsor and you're worried about this, or you hear a lot about sponsor of choice, like this is not a bad post to go read to see what not to do. Someone talking about sponsors having unrealistic expectations for timelines. We probably all feel that, especially at the site level. Lack of understanding of budgets. Sponsors want a champagne lifestyle on lemonade budget.
Lemonade, not even beer. Or
That's
lemonade.
Right. Well, there's the champagne of beer, so
High Life. Miller High Life from Milwaukee.
I don't know. Shout out Milwaukee. And again, a lot of good site perspectives here. Poor communication, unrealistic timelines, refusal to accommodate outstanding patient circumstances, poorly organized EDCs. This is not unlike the stuff you see on LinkedIn all the time, which I think is somewhat validating in a way.
The thing I thought was interesting about this, is that the original post came from someone who was at this sponsor site. It wasn't a site or a CRO saying the sponsor is difficult. It is someone who is sitting in the sponsor organization saying, we're difficult. Like, what do I do? And I think it's an interesting point to make that, like, maybe your contact at the sponsor might be your best advocate, even if the sponsor is difficult. Like, they may not be part of the problem. They could maybe even help. So I just thought it was an interesting perspective. I was expecting when I pulled this up, this to be from, disgruntled site or disgruntled CRO, but the fact that it came directly from within the sponsor organization, I thought was an interesting angle to this.
Well, and again, there's some self-awareness going on at sponsor level. I mean, I think again for sites, like I want to talk to the sponsor. We don't oftentimes get that luxury if there's a CRO involved, but it'd be nice to bridge that gap a little bit because sites will tell you. They're happy to tell you whether or not anyone will listen. If you're telling a CRA who works for a CRO, they're going to be like, hey, cool. See ya. I got 6 other sites to be at. So yeah, if you're this oncology biotech person, maybe you just could talk to some sites directly. I bet you'll get really good feedback. But yeah, I'm with you. I thought it was kind of interesting that it was the call came from within the house. Okay. On to the finale.
I think so. I'm very timely considering our announcement last week.
So if there were a pope of clinical research, who would it be? Question for the audience.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to hear you guys put in what you think. If there was a pope of clinical research, who would it be? Just putting that out there. Anyways,
what characteristics would make a good pope of clinical research?
I don't know. We could get really deep into this. This could turn into a very long podcast. We'll save that. We'll pin that for a slow week.
We'll put it in the parking lot and we'll talk about Catholicism and clinical research.
There you go. As long as we have a car with glass bulletproof.
The Pope Mobile.
To sit in. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Sorry, I'm not very well schooled. Anyways, this thread comes up every so often on Reddit. People to confess their research sins. And oftentimes it's kind of like silly stuff, I'm about to send a lot of queries, may I be forgiven. And then this one jumped out as just being like really unhinged that somebody hooked up with a coordinator at an investigator meeting. I justified it to myself that it wasn't my site, so no conflict of interest. Eventually, the site was transferred to me, and I hooked up with that coordinator again after an IMV. So they doubled down. Bold.
So, I mean, well, I guess you already stirred the pot, might as well. But like, my question being like, besides just poor judgment, right? Like, are there ethical concerns? Like, they even mentioned like conflict of interest when they
Yeah.
justified it, and they're like, yeah, there's no conflict of interest. It's not my site. It's like, now this is my site. Let's conflict this interest. Like, what? I just like, what are the ramifications of that? I mean, this reminds me a lot of like, I mean, back in the day when I was in school for a degree I'm not using, but we talked a lot about like, you know, if you're in mental health counseling, you can't get romantically involved with your patients because there's a power differential, and there is a, you know, power control dynamic that becomes unethical, and you can't consent, right? So like, I mean, obviously like a little bit more extreme example, but like, what are the ramifications of this? Like, how does this impact the trial actual operations and execution?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair question. And, you know, I'm sure this happens more often than any of us want to think. I mean, I've worked in hospitals, I've seen doctors and nurses and all kinds of debauchery, you know. So I'm not necessarily shocked. I just thought it was something a little
Well,
bit out of the norm.
to be clear, the professor who taught the ethics class then later hooked up with a student that semester.
Of
So,
course they did. Of
you know,
course
there's
they
some
did.
gray. There's some gray in this area.
And you got some other, you know, not quite as exciting ones that someone left a CRO for a health tech company 2 weeks ago, and now they're trying to poach their boss and all their, you know, highest performing. I thought this was a fun one from a site. Someone gave a patient a payment card or forgot to give them a patient card, uh, which, you know, my bad. But then they learned that they threw a clipboard at one of the medical assistants, and now they're just, you know, they're putting it off, making the patient suffer a little bit.
Active karma.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you gotta, you know, push it along a little bit, you know.
Well, there's one in here as well. I mean, there's someone, you know, mentioned that it's been, you know, at least a couple of weeks since their last note to file, and clearly they were referring to this podcast. So
It's true.
give them a couple Hail Marys and they'll be forgiven.
It's true. We need our own little hymnal, maybe, that
there you go.
we can give to people.
We can launch that during our Catholicism and clinical trials episode.
Perfect.
We have.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really it for today. Let's see. Do we miss any comments here? Here's a nice one. What's surprising is that in the few conversations I've had with many PEBC firms have robust health portfolios, yet they rarely cross-pollinate capabilities across their companies. There are clear low friction use cases sitting in their portfolio, but no one's connecting the dots. But that's literally the case I hear for PE? Is it like, well, yeah, but they can help centralize and support because they have all these other things in their portfolio. So that seems crazy that they're not actively doing that more regularly.
I mean, to be honest, like that's kind of what I've seen too. And again, like it is more complex than just being like, we're friends. Like this is, you know, Sammy, this is June, like playing the sandbox together because, you know, moms are friends. Like it's a little bit more complex than that. But I think it's more complex. It's not that complex. It should be easy enough to do. And I don't think folks do, frankly. And then you wonder like what other dots aren't being connected.
Yeah. Well, time will tell. And Stephanie, sounds like Riverside also on Greenfire. So Riverside's all over the place. Riverside,
I mean, maybe
you want to own a site network, Riverside? Give me a call. Actually, don't do that.
Get a good multiple.
Oh, I mean, double digits, triple digits, not stopping, triple digits. All right, guys, very cool. That's it. You got anything else?
I mean, I guess folks should tune in tomorrow, same time, same place. We have Matthew Holt on, which is going to be a riot. So
yeah, and there was a little bit of confusion. He was supposed to come on today, had some technical difficulties, so we stuck in his sticky notes. Yeah, he should be on tomorrow. I can appreciate anyone who self-identifies as a healthcare curmudgeon. So a big fan, and I think it's kind of fun to sort of stretch out beyond like the immediate clinical research space and start to have some other people on. So it should be fun. So
I'm excited.
Yeah, check in tomorrow. Yeah, same time. And guys, thanks for viewing. We'll be back tomorrow.
Catch you later.
Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.